Hey everybody, JB back with you once again for another board game cube shelf run through. We are on the third shelf today, and this one's packed with quite a few games. In fact, I would have to say out of all 16 of the cubes, this one might have the most eclectic selection in terms of just genres that it spans. So let's go ahead and jump in. We've got a lot to cover in this one. I'm going to take this one off for a second so I can just reach for this other one a little more easily here, but I'll come back to it later. For now, though, we're going to continue with the Arcane Wonders Dice Tower Essentials line with Good Critters. Now, this game is a little-known gem that I really like a lot. It's based on an older German game called Tief Taschen, which had kind of a boring political theme, and not like the cool kind of politics, but like the voting in the Senate kind of politics. But in this game, you're a bunch of anthropomorphic animals that are a part of the mob, and I love these character profiles here. Like, this one alone looks like evil Judy Hopps from Zootopia. Like, she quit the police and decided to join the mob, which is pretty funny. Anyway, though, the premise of this game is really fun. You have just pulled off a heist, and one player is designated as the boss. They've got this ring here, and they are divvying up all this loot amongst all the players, and the players basically just vote on if they think the loot is acceptable as a split. The boss can choose to be fair and try to split it up as evenly as possible, or maybe they want to go and try to favor certain people over others. But on your turn, where you all simultaneously pick what you want to do, you play a card that tells you what you're going to be doing, and then you decide, then you reveal all at the same time and show what you're going to do. So you can vote, or you can choose to abstain from voting, and you can rob the top of the loot pile and get some extra stuff. You can try to rob or guard against another player and get some of their stuff. And you can even bluff and threaten another player by putting your marker in front of them, but not actually do anything. So it's up to you. You can choose whether or not you think people are just bluffing and not being serious, or whether you do want to try to protect all the stuff that you have. And the game just ends when the police show up, when that card is drawn. So it's a really fun game. I think my only complaint about it would be that I wish there was just a little bit more in terms of objectives, like maybe having a secret objective saying, hey, try to go for paintings, or try to go for jewelry or something, or create certain kinds of sets. The rules seem to indicate that that might be featured in an expansion one day, but I don't know. We'll have to see how it goes. I also love how there's like this Zootopia kind of money, and it can go up to 8 players, which is pretty awesome. So, Good Critters, definitely want to check out. Highly recommend it. All right, we are going to move on to this one next, called Viral. This is a game in which you are a virus that's trying to invade a human body. Yeah, I'm not sure how many people are going to want to play this after the current situation that we're in right now. But this is a really fun game, though. It's got a very cartoonish theme. You're not really seriously hurting anybody. But I am kind of considering selling this one or donating it to a local game store or something like that, just in case people don't want to play this after the current crisis. The premise of this game, though, is a lot of fun. So the back of the box actually shows off quite a bit of what makes this game tick. You have this board that's kind of an abstract representation of a human body, and you have 5 rounds, and at the end of the 5 rounds, you're trying to get not victory points, but viral points, which are tracked over here on this kind of helix-looking thing here on the right side. So each round has these 6 steps on it, and the first step is the one where you're doing stuff. And I love this system because it's kind of like a programming system where you have a board that represents your virus here. And then down here is where you play these cards. You play 2 pairs of cards. One of them is for the actions you're doing, and then the other one is the organ in which you're going to be primarily operating. And the blue actions are the ones that have to happen there, whereas these clear ones can happen anywhere. And you can do all kinds of things. You can move around, you can spawn new viruses, you can shield your viruses to protect them, you can attack other players, magnetize them from adjacent organs, swallow them up so that they can't score this round, but then release them at the end of the round. You can cause a crisis in the current organ that you're in. There's so many different things you could do. And the fun thing is that whenever you resolve all these cards, you're not necessarily going to be able to do what you thought you did because everyone else is going to get in the way in some way. And by the time the program reaches the point where you're ready to execute that part of it, you're probably not going to be doing what you thought you did, but you still have all these options. And so the game is very open-ended in that regard, and it doesn't really restrict you, which I really like. After you do your actions, there's this research track thing here that you move up if you are able to win at scoring a certain organ. So like here's the lungs, and here's like the digestive system over here, and the kidneys and whatnot. If you win in these areas, you will probably be moving up this research track with your color. And research is bad, because research is essentially the doctors going, oh, hey, like we can identify what this virus is and we can treat it. And if you ever get to the top, then they're going to flush you out and you'll have to kind of start all over again. It's not a big deal because it's so easy just to get on board with a certain area, but it's going to happen to everyone at least one time. You can also cause like a crisis, which is what this is all about, where if there's too much of a virus, like up here in a certain organ, if there's too many tokens, then you'll put one of these skull tokens, which means that the immune system is kicking in and it's trying to flush you out. And so you'll get points for that, even though you're losing tokens. So it's a really fun game with a lot of thematic touches. Another thing I like is that over here on the left, you see all these cards. Whenever you pass certain points on the score track with, let's see, it's that symbol, you can draw a new card from here. And what I like about that is that it allows you to kind of to customize what you're trying to do. You can get points from these cards. You can also get additional cool actions from them. It's a really, really neat design, and I like it a lot. Don't know if it's going to be the thing that people want to play after this whole virus situation passes, but we'll see. I might sell it. We'll see how things go, but it's a lot of cartoonish, silly fun. Okay, the last of the Dice Tower Essentials that I own, at least for now, is Oni Tama. And this is a very unusual box size. It's kind of a square tube. And it has this really cool magnetic clasp here where you can just open it up and get to all the components here on the inside. So this game is the game I typically recommend to anyone who's looking for a two-player abstract game. So if you're in that boat where you're kind of like, you know, I like the idea of chess, but I don't really like how overwhelming it is in terms of options and moves and, you know, strategy and all that stuff, I highly recommend Oni Tama. It's essentially a stripped down version of chess, but it still has a lot of juicy decisions to make in the 10 minutes it takes to play it. So here you can see there's like a 5x5 board here, and this is actually a mat, like a giant, maybe not giant, but it is a neoprene mat, like a giant mouse pad. Not quite as small as a mouse pad, but not quite as big as like a table, for example. But it's a very nice mat. You get 4 pieces and then a master pawn. And you deal out 5 cards. There's a whole bunch of cards, and even more if you buy an expansion for the game. But you only pick 5 of these things. And you put 2 in front of each player, and then 1 on the right of the first player. And what you do on your turn is you pick up one of the 2 that's in front of you, and that determines your move. So like here in the middle is where your piece would be, that darker square. And then you can move that piece anywhere indicated here from your perspective to those slightly lighter squares. And when you do that, then you put that card on your left for your opponent to take, and then you grab the card that's on your right. And so there's this constant cycling of cards throughout the game. And what I love about it is that there's this constant tension that you feel when you're going around and you're making these moves knowing that you are potentially giving your opponent the exact move they might need to win. And I just love that tension. It's such a great game. It's very simple. It has a cool martial arts theme, which is pretty awesome, and very nice presentation. This is a solid, solid game. Definitely one of the more well-known ones in the Dice Tower Essentials line, and one I would highly recommend as well. Okay, we are going to go to an even smaller game than Oni Tama next, which is No Thanks. And I accidentally spilled water here on the box, unfortunately, which is why you see those wrinkles there. No Thanks is the game that I readily recommend to anyone who likes Skip-Bo. If you've ever played the card game Skip-Bo, you're probably going to enjoy this game. It's best described, I think, as an auction game of sorts. And it's very simple. All you do is that you have a pile of cards in the middle of the table. You have one face up, and then on your turn, you decide, hey, am I going to take this card or am I going to say no to it and put a chip on it? And that's the only decision you're going to be making throughout the whole game. There's cards from 3 to 35, I believe, and then you remove, I think, maybe a third of them or so. Maybe not quite that many, but you remove quite a few of them at the start so you don't have the ability to card count. And then you get to decide, do I want this card or not? Because points, the number on the card, points are bad. You don't want to have points at the end of the game. And the chips themselves are worth negative points. So you can say no to a card, but if it goes around a couple more times and there's more chips on it, then that might be a sweet deal, because you've essentially got more power to say no on future turns. The other neat trick to the game is that you can create runs. So if I have like 17 and 18 or 17, 18, 19, then only the lowest card counts. So in that case, only 17 would count. But another player might see that 18 and go, ooh, if he gets that, then, he's not going to really be affected by it. So do I want to take that and maybe risk getting negative points, or is that too much of a liability? It's a really neat game and a really cool design and very simple to learn. I absolutely adore this, and it goes up to 7 players, so a great game for large groups. Okay, on to 2 tile laying games here. The first one is an absolute classic, and it is Carcassonne from 20 years ago. This game is still a favorite of mine to this day. It's the game that I always describe to people as, it's like you're building a puzzle, but you get to decide how the puzzle is built. And I really enjoy that. It's got such a neat concept that's simple to get into, but it's very difficult to master. You just place a tile on the board, just make sure that the sides match. You can put a meeple of these little guys here on any feature of the tile, and then if that feature is completed, you can score points. So roads are completed when they lead somewhere or end at an intersection. Cities are completed when they're walled off. These monasteries or cloisters are completed whenever they're completely surrounded, and so on and so forth. And what's really fun about this is that you can really mess around with people by putting tiles that make it more inconvenient for them to complete stuff. But you don't have to do that. You can just play the game by, just putting the tiles on and not really worrying about anything. And I like it for that level of accessibility. It's something that a lot of people understand, building a puzzle. But like when they do it here and they see the sheer amount of variety that you can make with these landscapes, just with a few simple features, it's just magic. Like the looks on people's faces when they see how this works, it's just so fun. There's also some expansions for this, some better than others. There's even 2 little ones that come in the box with like a river, which adds kind of an introductory round where you get to build out the landscape and give you some options. I haven't played with the Abbot yet, but that's also there available. It's really cool. It's a really neat game, and one that I will probably own for quite some time. Okay, we are going to move on to a simpler tile-laying game than Carcassonne, and that's King Domino. It took me forever to realize that this was a portmanteau of the words kingdom and domino. For some reason, I just didn't get it for the longest time. But King Domino is kind of like a stripped-down version of Carcassonne, where you have only a 5x5 grid that you can work within. And essentially what you're doing is you're just trying to build contiguous land formations out of these dominoes, which are colors instead of like dots or pips on them. And so the more you can build these formations, the more they're going to be worth, especially if they have crowns on them, which are multipliers. So in this case, you would have 3, the number of squares, times the number of crowns, which is 5, for 15 points here, which is a pretty sweet deal. Whereas this farmland over here is worth 2 times 1, with 2 squares and 1 crown. And this water is 3 times 1. I love this game for the mechanism of turn order, especially. What you do on each turn is you have 4 of these dominoes right here lined up, and each player has a little meeple here. And what you do is you flip over the tiles. They are all numbered, with the lower number ones tending to be the less valuable ones, and the higher number ones are the more valuable ones. And then you pick one, knowing what's on there, and you also have the tiles, the number of the tiles next to here, so you know what's coming up in the next round. But the tile that you pick on the current round is going to determine the turn order for the next round. So if I was blue and I put my guy there, then that's going to be the second one. So that means I'm going to be second in turn order for the next round. So there's this push and pull between, do I want a good tile or do I want to have my first pick of all the next group of tiles? It's a fascinating system, and I really like it a lot. It's also neat because there is this constraint of 5x5 for the landscape you're building, so you can't really, go completely wild with it, but just within that decision-making space, there's a lot that you can do with it, and that's really neat. The crowns definitely add, the ability to score, so you really have to be on the lookout for that. There's also a cool 2-player variant where you can just get all the tiles and do 2 turns per round for a 7x7 grid, which is pretty neat. All right, the next game is the one I took off the shelf at the beginning here, which is King Domino Duel. This is a game I picked up at Gen Con last August from the publisher Blue Orange, who did the original King Domino. And this is very unusual. There's a lot of these games that have spin-offs where they take they either go into a 2-player variant or they take a roll and write approach to the game. But I don't think I've ever seen a game that is both 2 players and a roll and write, which is kind of unusual. But this game is that. It's both only a 2-player game, and it's also a roll and write game with dice. So in this game, you have 4 dice you roll, and it works the same way as King Domino as far as trying to build this landscape. It's bigger than 5x5, though, where you're having to build these contiguous land formations and whatnot, and instead of crowns, there's these X's here. But instead of tiles, you're building the dominoes out of dice. So you have 2 players, one of them takes the first die, the second player takes 2 dice, and then the first player takes the remaining die. And then you just build the domino out of these dice and then draw it on your board. But what I really like about this is that there's this additional element to the game that makes it very interesting, where you take a third sheet out of these player sheets here, and you flip it over, and there's this reverse side where the different land types are represented here on the right side. But you have to get, you want to get these powers here in the middle, and so every time you take a die that doesn't have an X on it, the scoring thing, then you can mark off a box on your side of the boxes. So one player has this side, the other player has this side. And so the first player to get to the middle and check off that red box gets whatever that power is. So there's some like being able to split up the dice or being able to rotate the die to whatever face you want. There's so much here that adds so much depth to the game, all without making it complicated. And I really enjoy that a lot. So that's King Domino Duel. Really fun 2-player game. Very simple rules and a blast to teach. And it comes in another magnetic class box too, which is always nice. And this one, did I not get it all the way in? There you go. Cool. All right. Last 2 games for today. First off is Mission Red Planet. This is one of the oldest games I own in terms of how long it's been in the collection. But it actually is one of the older games in terms of when it was first released, because the first edition of this game came out in 2004, I think, and then this one came out in 2014, the second edition. It's a game that was co-designed by 2 Brunos, Faduti and Katala, the latter of whom is one of my favorite designers. And this game is a winner. It's kind of based on the system that Faduti used in one of his earlier designs, and some of you may have played this game called Citadels, where you have just a hand of cards, and you play one on your turn, everyone plays one simultaneously, and then you reveal them and you have to resolve their effects. And there's different effects that affect other people. This game takes that system and it adds a little more onto it. At first, it adds a really cool kind of steampunk sci-fi theme here, where there's these Victorian-era corporations that are trying to go to Mars in these cool rockets, which is pretty awesome. It's also for 2 to 6 players, which makes it great for a big group. But what really makes it fun is that not only do you have that character selection thing from Citadels, you also have this cool area control thing. So if you have friends who really like games like Risk, this is one of the first games I would introduce to them. It's basically the conflict of Risk, but without the 4-hour time limit. Like, it doesn't really take that much time at all. So what you do is you play these character cards all simultaneously, all face down, And then whoever has this dial, usually it's the person who plays the lowest card on the previous round, I think, does a blast off countdown. They go 9, 8, 7, 6, and so on and so forth. And then whenever your number card is called, you flip it over and you resolve its effect. And that's all you do. You just do whatever the card says. And so these cards do different things. They can put astronauts of your color on the rockets so that you can blast them off and go to Mars. You can sabotage your opponents and blow up their rockets. You can move around Mars and try to control different areas. And ultimately, you're trying to control areas so that you can get the resource tokens that are located there. And these are worth different points. You don't know what they are at the start until you flip them over. And so the ones that are worth more are going to be more contested. And then the more you go on, the more they're going to be multiplied whenever you have production rounds, which are what these dots are. And then after 10 rounds, and then after the final production phases and whatnot, then you end the game and you count how many points everybody has. It's so simple, but it's so satisfying. And the artwork and the character design and the graphic design, it's very charming. It's just a really, really neat presentation all around. Highly recommend the second edition of Mission Red Planet. If you're looking for an area control game to start your collection with, this is a pretty solid choice. All right, and then finally we have a classic party game, Wits and Wagers. This is a game that came out in the early 2000s, and this is a trivia game, which is not typically the sort of game that I gravitate toward. And the main reason for that is because typically trivia games have that issue of one person being kind of the know-it-all, where they just know all the answers and stuff, and then no one wants to play with that person, right? Well, Wits and Wagers solves that issue, because what you do in this game is that all the questions are numerical answers. So, like here in the box, it gives this example of in inches, how tall is the Oscar statuette, right? And then everybody secretly writes down their answer on a dry erase board, and then they turn them in, and they're all arranged on this mat. Everybody then gets the opportunity to bet on, using these poker chips, what they believe the best answer is. And then there are higher payouts for the more extreme answers. So it's basically Price is Right rules. Like, you want to get the correct answer without going over, or the closest to the correct answer without going over. Or if someone happens to write the exact answer, that counts as well. That especially counts, actually. I love this game. It's so simple because you don't really have to know the right answer. You just have to be confident in who you think knows the right answer. Or you could just go all in and bet on yourself if you want to. I also love the fact that it's only 7 questions. You just, you get the chips depending on what you bet, and then you can use those chips in future rounds, which is pretty cool. It's a really neat game. It also works really well for like a pub trivia setting where there's teams. You can have each team get their own dry erase board. It's amazing. Highly recommend this one if you're looking for a trivia game. All right, that is it for shelf number 3. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me today. Next time, we're going to be moving on to shelf number 4 over here. And this one's going to have some more large group games. We got a few dexterity games and some racing games, as well as a few other things. So until next time, everybody, thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed yourself today, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and ring that bell to get notified of the next episode. But until then, I will catch you later. Take care, and I will see you next time.